Washington thought Canada would hesitate. They assumed negotiations, slow diplomacy, maybe even concessions. Instead, Canada did the unthinkable, cutting a direct path to China, bypassing the U.S. entirely. For years, the U.S. had a chokehold on Canada's energy exports. Almost every drop of crude flowed south. Now, that grip is slipping. New tariffs, rising tensions, and a pipeline that just changed the rules forever. This isn't just about oil, it's about control. And for the first time in decades, Canada is making its own rules. For years, Canada's energy was funneled into the U.S. One buyer, one dependency, one risk, but not anymore. The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion now pumps 890,000 barrels per day straight to the Pacific, giving Canada access to global markets. China, the biggest winner. Canada, finally breaking free. And the U.S., losing leverage by the day. With the global energy landscape shifting, Canada is playing smart, diversifying its buyers to avoid dependence on a single market. A 10% tariff on Canadian oil was the final straw. Washington assumed Canada would absorb the costs. Instead, Canada turned east. Why beg the U.S. to buy when China is eager to secure long-term deals? Canada saw an opportunity, and they took it. Canada had watched as other energy exporters, like Russia and Saudi Arabia, secured long-term energy partnerships with China. Now, Canada is doing the same. The $24 billion Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion changed the equation overnight. More than tripling capacity, it ensures Canadian crude can now flow directly to China, Japan, and Korea. This isn't just about new markets. It's about freedom from U.S. pricing control. And with China importing nearly 50% of its oil through Vancouver's ports, this new route gives Canada direct access to the world's second-largest economy. U.S. refiners are paying extra due to tariffs. Meanwhile, China is buying Canadian crude at a discount. For Beijing, this is a strategic gold mine, securing a reliable crude supply without Washington's oversight. For Canada, this means avoiding heavy discounts that came with selling oil to a U.S.-dominated market. U.S. refineries depend on Canadian heavy crude. They were built for it. But now, they're paying more while China pays less. The U.S. set the tariffs. Now its own refiners are feeling the squeeze. Some refiners are now pushing the White House to lift tariffs, fearing economic losses and supply chain disruptions. China isn't just buying oil. They're locking in supply for the long haul. Beijing wants energy security, and Canada's shift is a perfect opportunity. China has been actively diversifying its energy sources, securing long-term contracts with nations like Russia, Venezuela, and Iran. Now, Canada joins that list. China's strategy isn't just about short-term deals. It's about building lasting trade relationships that bypass U.S. influence. On the surface, it looks like China simply took advantage of Canada's shift. But in reality, Beijing saw this coming, and they were ready. For years, China silently expanded its energy infrastructure to reduce its dependence on OPEC and secure diverse crude sources. Now, those investments are paying off. Refinery upgrades. China spent billions upgrading refineries to handle heavier crude, perfect for Canada's oil sands. Pipeline expansion. Major crude pipelines, including the China-Russia ESPO pipeline, were expanded to integrate new supply routes. Port modernization. Key oil terminals, including those in Qingdao and Dalian, have been expanded to handle more incoming shipments. This wasn't an overnight reaction. It was a long-term strategy. And now, it's paying off. Before, the U.S. had Canada in a stranglehold. Now, Canada has options. If Washington tightens restrictions, Canada doesn't have to play along. They have China in their corner now. This newfound leverage is reshaping Canada's entire economic outlook, giving it more bargaining power in future trade negotiations. Instead of selling at U.S.-controlled prices, Canada now plays by its own rules. More revenues mean billions reinvested into infrastructure, new pipelines, and energy projects. And for China, cheap, reliable oil. A perfect deal. This move could make Canada's energy sector more competitive on a global scale, expanding exports beyond just oil to LNG and other energy sources. Could Canada completely halt exports to the U.S.? It's unlikely, for now. But with new buyers, Canada holds leverage like never before. If tensions rise, Washington could face a real energy crisis. The threat of a Canadian oil supply cut could force Washington to reconsider its trade strategies. More oil exports to China mean more tanker traffic, more emissions, and bigger risks. Coastal communities are raising concerns. Environmentalists are sounding alarms. To ensure long-term sustainability, Canada must invest in safety measures, enforce strict regulations, and develop greener energy alternatives. Washington didn't expect Canada to move this fast. Now, it's searching for options. For decades, Canadian crude was a core piece of U.S. energy security. That balance? It's shifting. Option 1. Find a new supplier. But who? Venezuela? Unstable and under sanctions? Saudi Arabia? Politically complicated. Domestic U.S. shale? Not a fit. Refineries need heavy crude, not light oil. Option 2. Pressure Canada to stay in line. But Ottawa? It has other buyers now. For the first time in years, Canada isn't waiting on Washington. The U.S. still gets Canadian oil, but not on its terms anymore. It's easy to focus on the three biggest players, Canada, the U.S., and China. But this shift? It's sending ripple effects across the global energy market. Japan and South Korea. More supply competition means lower costs. Both nations are highly dependent on oil imports and have refining capacity built to handle heavy crude. With Canada now shipping more to Asia, they gain access to alternative supplies at competitive rates. India, diversification beyond the Middle East. India has long been dependent on OPEC nations, but with Canadian crude entering the Asian market, it has another supplier to reduce its exposure to Middle Eastern price swings. Energy traders and shipping companies. More crude moving across the Pacific means more profits for oil traders, tanker operators, and logistics firms handling Canada's shipments. This isn't just a Canada-China shift. It's reshaping energy flows across the entire Asia-Pacific region. And for many, it's an opportunity. OPEC is paying attention, and for good reason. China relies heavily on OPEC oil, importing millions of barrels a day from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the UAE. But now, Canada is in the mix. More Canadian oil means China isn't as dependent on the Middle East. OPEC nations may need to cut prices or offer longer-term deals to stay competitive. Russia is also watching. Moscow has built deep energy ties with Beijing, but Canada's growing presence could shake up that equation. This isn't just about Canada, China, and the U.S. It's a global shift. This pivot to China isn't just a trade move, it's an energy transformation. Canada isn't just selling oil, it's building for the future. The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion tripled capacity, 890,000 barrels per day, now flowing west. New port investments mean more crude can ship to Asia, faster. Energy firms are locking in long-term China contracts, ensuring stability. Canada is doing more than diversifying. It's cementing its role as a major energy exporter beyond North America. For China, this isn't just a good deal, it's a necessity. Beijing has spent years strategically reducing its dependence on Middle Eastern oil. Why? Because it knows the risks. Geopolitical instability, The Middle East remains a volatile region. A conflict or supply disruption could cripple China's energy security. U.S. naval control. Most Middle Eastern oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most militarized waterways in the world, heavily influenced by the U.S. supply chain vulnerability. Relying too much on OPEC nations means China has less pricing power and stability. That's where Canada comes in, a politically stable supplier. No war zones, no unpredictable embargoes, a direct Pacific shipping route, no reliance on contested choke points, heavy crude for China's upgraded refineries. Perfect match. This isn't just about price. It's about securing the future. And China? It just found the perfect energy partner. Selling oil to China makes economic sense. But politically, it's complicated. For years, Canada tried to balance ties between the U.S. and China. Now, it's making direct energy deals with Beijing. The U.S. remains a key trade partner, but Ottawa is no longer dependent on it. China's rising influence in Canada's economy raises questions in Washington. Domestic political debates over the environment, trade security, and foreign policy are heating up. Canada isn't taking sides. It's playing its own game. But that game? It's changing the energy landscape. This isn't just a shift in oil markets, it's a power shift. Canada gains economic strength. More buyers, more influence. China diversifies its supply. Less OPEC dependence, more leverage. The U.S. faces an energy challenge, still buying Canadian oil, but without the same control. For years, Canada's oil trade was predictable. Now, it's rewriting the rules. This isn't just a new oil route, it's a turning point. Canada's oil trade with China isn't just a business deal, it's a geopolitical shift. The U.S. is recalculating its next steps. OPEC is watching closely. China is securing its future energy supply. And Canada? It's becoming a global energy player, on its own terms. This isn't a temporary adjustment. This is the new energy reality. The question now? Who moves next? Because Canada? It's already ahead. Big moves are happening. And this is just one of them. Make sure you're locked in. Subscribe now. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.